Dead End is a horror thriller film about a man named Frank Harrington, who, along with his family, finds himself trapped on a terrifying unknown road during a snowy Christmas night. The story begins with Frank driving his car toward his in-laws' house for Christmas dinner. Sitting in the back seat are his wife Laura, their daughter Marion, and son Richard. Frank, feeling exhausted and tired, glances at his family sleeping peacefully in the car. As he continues driving, fatigue takes over and he dozes off for a moment. Suddenly, Frank almost crashes into another vehicle. Panic erupts in the car as everyone screams, but miraculously, they narrowly avoid injury. After the scare, Laura scolds Frank for falling asleep at the wheel and worries about the Christmas pie she bought for dinner. They take a different route, and Frank checks the car to see if it's damaged. Surprisingly, the car looks fine, and the other vehicle is nowhere in sight. Feeling relieved, Frank starts driving again. Laura notices something strange. She sees a woman in white standing on the side of the road. Frank dismisses it, saying everyone is home with their families tonight. Marion complains of motion sickness and Richard teases her. Tensions flare as Laura drinks water directly from a bottle, which annoys everyone, and arguments break out about sharing drinks. Marion tries to calm everyone, but Richard keeps criticizing her and her boyfriend Brad. Despite the chaos, they begin to sing Jingle Bells, trying to lift their spirits. Suddenly, Frank slams on the brakes. He claims he saw a woman in white holding a baby in the woods. They all stop and stare into the darkness, searching for her. To their surprise, she appears suddenly at the car window, scaring everyone. Frank asks her if she's okay. Noticing she has a bruise on her face, she seems in shock. Frank suggests calling emergency services, but Brad checks his phone and finds there's no signal. Frank offers to give the woman a ride, hoping they'll find a nearby cabin. Brad and Richard are hesitant to leave their seats, so Marion decides to walk to a cabin for some fresh air, hoping to escape her motion sickness. The woman in white, holding a crying baby, gets into the car. Laura tries to talk to her, but she remains silent, lost in her shock. They arrive at a small cabin and Richard ventures into the woods, acting strangely. He's seen looking at magazines and even masturbating. Meanwhile, Frank and Laura go inside to check the place. Leaving Brad and the woman in white alone in the car, Brad attempts to talk to her, but she doesn't respond. Marion, walking alone on the road, is deep in thought about her recent breakup. Inside the cabin, Frank tries to call for help, but the phone doesn't work. Suddenly, the woman in white speaks to Brad, revealing her baby's name is Emmy. She hands the baby to Brad, who notices the baby is covered in blood. Frightened, he screams. Hearing his scream, Frank and Laura rush outside. When they arrive, they find Brad and the woman in white have vanished. Marion, walking nearby, sees Brad in a black hearse through a back window, realizing he's been kidnapped. She runs to her parents to tell them. Frank speeds after the black car, but they crash into something. An unidentified body lies dead in the road. Shocked and devastated, Frank orders Marion to stay back. Richard helps his parents get the phone from Brad's corpse, which is in a terrible state. Laura attempts to call the police, but on the line, a crying woman pleads for help. Terrified, Laura panics, claiming the phone is broken and insisting they should keep moving. Frank insists they can't leave Brad's body in the road. Richard helps put the dead man in the trunk of the car. Laura, overwhelmed, slaps Marion to wake her from shock. Frank calms her down. Richard, trembling, suggests the killer might have used a chainsaw or axe. Frank vows to go to the police, but as they drive, they see a sign for Marcotte, an unfamiliar place. They realize they've never heard of this town before. They check the map, but Marcotte isn't listed. Frustration and fear grow as they argue. They notice all the clocks in the car are stopped at exactly 7:30, and Richard suggests that it might be some sort of alien activity, especially given what's happened to Brad and others. Frank and Laura dismiss his ideas, but Marion, still in shock, begins singing Jingle Bells again, irritating everyone. Their journey continues, and suddenly, they see a baby carriage abandoned on the road. Laura wants to ignore it, but Richard gets out of the car to check. He jokes about being eaten by something, trying to lighten the mood. Frank and Laura get out, angry at Richard's antics, and they move the carriage aside. Frank takes a bottle of whiskey from the car and drinks, despite Laura's protests that it's a Christmas gift. Richard then tries to talk to Marion, but she's still in shock and doesn't respond. Next, Richard sees the carriage again ahead of the car and warns his parents. They dismiss him, thinking he's joking. Frank moves the carriage once more, and they resume their drive, but tensions flare again. Frank and Laura argue, and the radio emits strange crying baby sounds. Suddenly, the car's tire blows out, leaving them stranded. At that moment, Marion shocks everyone by announcing she's pregnant. Richard admits he's into drugs. Frustrated and overwhelmed, Frank gets out to fix the tire. Laura asks where Richard has gone, and Frank says he's probably smoking in the woods. Richard is indeed in the forest, where he encounters the woman in white. She approaches him, and they kiss. She then rips his lower lip, and Richard, love-struck and terrified, tells her he loves her. She strips naked, revealing herself fully, and Richard screams in horror. Meanwhile, Frank, Marion, and Laura see Richard being forcibly taken away in a black car. They run after it but lose sight of it. They finally find Richard's mutilated, dead body in the woods. Devastated, they cry and mourn him. Laura, overwhelmed with grief, confesses to Frank that he isn't Richard's biological father. She had an affair with a man named Alan in the past. Frank is shattered by the revelation. Frank, crying, takes Laura into the car, and Marion sits beside Richard's corpse, crying. Frank insists they must go to the police. Marion, in shock, opens a Christmas gift, a gun that belonged to Laura's gun-obsessed brother, and gives it to Frank. He loads the gun, readying himself for what's to come. Laura was sitting in the backseat of the car, eating like a child. She suddenly told Frank that Richard's real name was Miko. As they drove along, they kept seeing signs for Marcotte, which only added to the strange feeling lingering in the air. Marion and Frank watched Laura becoming more unhinged. She seemed to be losing her grip on reality. Marion gently said to Frank, "Sooner or later, Laura will have to face the truth." Frank looked ahead, worried. "We might never reach Marcotte," he replied. "That lady in white, I saw her in the woods earlier. Maybe she's the one we should worry about first." Frank then shared a story from his childhood. He told Marion that the strange tale reminded him of a story his grandfather used to tell him. Meanwhile, Laura was drawing a picture. It was disturbing. In her drawing, she depicted Brad being mutilated, which made Frank and Marion even more worried. Suddenly, Frank remembered something from his past. He told Marion about a family he once heard about. They had picked up a little girl sitting on the side of the road, holding a school book with the last name Rose. When they drove away, they heard a scream from the back of the car. When they looked back, the girl had vanished. Only her school book was left behind. The book had the name Rose, and Frank recalled that everyone in the Rose family had died in a tragic car accident. He wondered if this story was connected to their current situation, but Marion dismissed it as just folklore. Laura was acting more like a child now. She ate strange things and looked sick. She got out of the car and started vomiting on the roadside. Marion asked Frank about the man Laura had mentioned having an affair with. Frank shook his head. "She's just in shock," he said. "There's no one named Alan." Then, Laura found a gun in the car. She thought it was a toy and started playing with it, pointing it at Frank and Marion. Suddenly, she became angry when Frank told her son Richard was dead. Without warning, she shot at Frank's leg, injuring him badly. Marion quickly cleaned and bandaged Frank's wound, but Frank was determined to keep driving. He insisted they must be on Naval Base Military Road, which was why they hadn't found their way out yet. Marion was exhausted and fell asleep for a little while. When she woke up, she was worried because Frank was no longer in the car. She looked around and saw him outside, talking to someone. They shared a hug, and then they saw Laura outside the car too. Laura told them they should stick together. She said she understood Frank and Marion's relationship, and that she could see faces outside the window, all of them looking so sad. Then Laura claimed she saw a friend of hers, someone who had died, and asked Frank to stop so she could see her. Frank refused, but Laura suddenly opened the car door and jumped out. Frank and Marion quickly stopped the car to look for her. They saw her shoes lying on the ground, and then they saw her being taken away by a black hearse. Frank shot at the hearse to stop it, and to their relief, Laura stumbled back toward them. She said she was okay, but her head was hurting. When they checked her, they saw her skull was split open. She started rubbing her head and dimly remembered a night with Alan, the man she had an affair with, and telling her father she made the cheerleading squad before she died. Frank, overwhelmed with grief, closed her eyes and helped her into the car. Both Frank and Marion felt hopeless. They didn't know how to escape this nightmare. Frank was so desperate he put the gun to his chin, contemplating ending it all. Marion, scared, stopped him. They decided to keep driving, trying to find a way out. As they headed toward Marcotte, Frank explained that Alan had been his friend back in Detroit. Alan had come to him for advice about a married woman, Laura. Frank told Marion that Alan wanted to know whether he should keep having the affair. Frank had encouraged him, saying, "You only live once." The last time Frank saw Alan was when Alan told him Laura wanted to end the affair because she now had a little girl, Marion. Frank took a sip of whiskey, trying to steady himself. Marion angrily tossed the bottle out the window. Tired and desperate, Frank suggested they needed to leave the woods because they couldn't go on like this. But after driving through the woods, they realized they'd gone in a circle. They were back where they started. They kept driving, with Frank making a list of things he wanted to do once this ordeal was over, things he didn't share with Marion. Then, unexpectedly, they had to stop again. Frank suddenly realized they were back at the cabin where everything began. It was as if someone was playing a cruel game with them. He lit a match, trying to see inside the cabin. But suddenly, the woman in white appeared behind him and blew out the match. Marion, hearing strange noises, ran inside the cabin to see what was happening. When she stepped outside, she saw Frank and called to him. They walked toward the car, but Frank was starting to act just like Laura, confused and unstable. He asked Marion for whiskey, but she threw the bottle outside. Frank, now losing control, began to beat Marion until she lost consciousness. When he finally realized what he was doing, Frank felt terrible. He helped Marion into the car and tried to compose himself. Outside, the woman in white was walking into the woods. Frank chased after her, shooting at her, but he was killed in the process. Meanwhile, Marion, unconscious, was dreaming. She saw her family's bodies lined up and a hearse coming toward her. She thought it was meant for her, but the woman in white passed her by, telling her she wasn't there for her, and got into a black car. Herself. Suddenly, Marion awoke in a hospital bed. She saw a female doctor with a tag that read, "Dr. Marcotte." A man dressed in black was nearby, telling her he found her after the crash. The doctor explained that everyone else in the accident had died, everyone except Marion. They went outside to the parking lot. The doctor's car wouldn't start, so the man offered her a lift in his own vehicle, a black hearse. Marion was surprised by the vintage car, and the man said he was a collector. As she looked at the strange but beautiful car, Marion wondered what would happen next. The nightmare was finally over, or so she thought. And if your entertainment stops now, it would cause a nightmare, right? That's why you can just click on my recaps on the right to keep going. Don't forget to subscribe for future uploads. As always, grab your popcorn, enjoy yourself, and see you soon, my friend.